Tonight, brazen, callous and targeted. A father shot dead in front of his young son outside a Sydney gym. Former Minister Stuart Robert faces a grilling at the Robo-Debt Royal Commission. Could daily letter deliveries soon be a thing of the past? And footy's back. Can the Parramatta Eels beat Melbourne Storm in tonight's NRL season opener in Sydney? Good evening, Juanita Phillips with ABC News. Police have called it a targeted organised crime murder. A Sydney father shot dead in a hail of bullets outside a gym as his young son watched. Tonight, police are hunting for the gunman and his getaway driver.
A father gunned down in front of his young son.
They're callous and they're brazen, and they have little disregard for human life.
Just after 6:30 this morning, 40-year-old Taha Sabah was parked in front of a martial arts gym in Sefton with his 12-year-old son when another car stopped nearby. A gunman got out and fired up to 10 shots at Mr Sabah before fleeing the scene, leaving his traumatised son screaming for help.
He was shot inside the car with his 12-year-old son right next to him.
Workers from neighbouring businesses had already arrived for the day when they heard gunshots and rushed to help until emergency crews could get here. But Mr Sabah could not be saved.
Other neighbours were woken by police as they canvassed the area.
When I wake up, the boy is crying. The man's son is crying.
Shortly after, fire crews were called to a street in nearby Birrong where a vehicle had been set alight. Police believe the Mazda 3 could be the getaway car.
Whether he was the intended target or not, we'll still keep an open mind. It hasn't been established, but the hallmarks of the circumstances lean towards a targeted organised crime murder.
As forensic officers combed the crime scene for hours, detectives worked to track down the gunman.
He was associated to people that are well known to police and has strong criminal activity.
Police do not believe the shooting is connected to a string of gangland murders last year. Leah Harris, ABC News, Sydney.
The Robo-Debt Royal Commission heard extraordinary testimony today from a former senior minister who admitted making false public statements about the illegal scheme. Stuart Robert conceded the coalition got it wrong, but said he had no choice but to defend government policy. Mr Robert told the inquiry he takes absolute responsibility for the scheme's failure.
A mea culpa from a former Morrison government minister.
Do you take any responsibility for what the government of which you were part did?
Oh, absolutely, Commissioner. As a senior member of the government, I take absolute responsibility as part of Cabinet solidarity for this.
Still, Stuart Robert thinks he deserves some credit.
But I also take responsibility for being the minister that called it out to say we've got to get advice and stop it.
He was the minister in charge of Robo-Debt in 2019. The Commission heard he knew income averaging, the method used to assess Centrelink debts, was wrong, but he supported the scheme publicly anyway.
Ministers are required to defend the government's programs, regardless if they agree with them or not.
Conceding he made false public statements.
I remain a Cabinet minister and am responsible for holding the Cabinet line.
The Commissioner wasn't buying it.
And as a dutiful Cabinet minister, ma'am, that's what we do.
Misrepresent things to the Australian public?
I wouldn't respectfully put it that way.
Mr Robert claims his department withheld critical legal advice from him for months, and if he'd seen it, he would have acted sooner to stop the scheme.
I had it for 2 hours and walked straight into the Prime Minister's office to put a stop to it.
And despite a seemingly good eye for detail,
I'm a prolific diarist. I'm a prolific act reader.
Mr Robert couldn't recall telling his former department secretary to double down on Robo-Debt after he learned it was unlawful.
She says that you said words to the effect, legal advice is just advice.
The idea that I'd come out of the Prime Minister's office, who's agreed with the Solicitor General's view, that I would then ignore those two and say we're going to double down on the same project, doesn't make any sense at all.
Later, Marise Payne, who was Human Services Minister when Robo-Debt was proposed, was questioned for a second time. She said she had no control over the budget process.
I was the junior minister in the portfolio to the senior cabinet minister.
That senior minister was Scott Morrison. Kira Jones, ABC News, Brisbane.
This month's state election is set to be fought and won in Western Sydney. Both political parties are injecting cash into the region to try to lock down votes in the crucial battleground.
Brewing up a shot of financial relief.
Well, let me have a crack.
Yeah, let's go.
Dominic Perrottet is pledging $500 rebates for small businesses over the next 2 years.
Every dollar counts, and we know particularly our smallest businesses are doing it tough right now.
The coalition is also promising new parklands and health hubs in Western Sydney.
And they are funded through Westinvest, our $5 billion fund dedicated to livability in the West.
Labor has its sights on the western suburbs too, but is cautious over the state budget it could take on.
We will inherit the largest debt ever passed from one government to the next in the history of the state of New South Wales.
We're the only state in the nation with 2 AAA credit ratings.
Labor has scrapped another big project. If elected, it won't go ahead with an 11-kilometre stretch of tunnel from Blackheath to Little Hartley in the Blue Mountains. Instead, the party would redirect that money towards fixing roads and bottlenecks across the state.
This is critical infrastructure across Western Sydney and regional New South Wales. It's needed now, not into the never, never.
Both leaders are spending significant time in Western Sydney trying to lock down votes. Labor is promoting itself as a government that would be fiscally responsible but pragmatic, while the coalition is seeking re-election as a government that has a long-term vision for the future of the state. Two leaders with different visions but mutual respect for each other.
I have to say he's great company. He's very good company. And I think we'd probably be better friends if I wasn't trying to get him sacked. But
Well, I think he's very good company too, but it's slightly awkward that we want to end each other's careers.
But you don't enter politics to make friends. Cayman Gok, ABC News, Sydney.
5-day-a-week letter deliveries could soon be a thing of the past as Australia Post prepares to overhaul its business model. Parcel deliveries are soaring, but letters have plummeted and it's costing the government-owned business dearly.
Oh, I've just been waiting for this.
Letters were once a part of everyday life, but those days are long gone.
I have to admit, I don't get a lot of letters these days.
We just don't really need to post physical letters very much anymore.
4.6 billion letters were sent in Australia in 2008. Since then, that number has fallen to 1.6 billion. The average household now receives just 2.4 letters per week, and that's expected to halve again within 5 years.
We face a difficult future as fewer people send letters and consumers increasingly embrace digital services.
Australia Post is required to deliver letters to 98% of Australian homes 5 days a week. And a single stamp, which costs $1.20, has to get a letter from one side of the country to the other. Those rules could be about to change.
The clock is ticking on our mail business, so the timing of this consultation process is ideal in terms of looking at our future needs.
In metro urban areas, there are very few people that need their letters delivered to the end of their driveway every day.
People always have that requirement to send a letter, and that's their right to do so.
But letters are costing Australia Post a fortune. It will record a loss this year for the first time since 2015.
Australia Post needs to ensure that it remains viable.
Any changes to the Australia Post service must improve our community services and not water them down.
Its parcels business, on the other hand, is booming.
We will continue to be present in Australian streets 5, 6 or potentially even 7 days a week because our parcel business continues to grow.
Communication has transformed in recent decades and Australia Post is going to have to transform with it. Some barriers have been drawn. For example, any privatisation has been ruled out. And there's a commitment to rural areas, acknowledging the role post offices play there. But if Australia Post is going to be around in decades to come, it will have to look different. Tom Lowry, ABC News, Canberra.
The Australian Defence Force has landed in the flood-hit Northern Territory outback to help evacuate hundreds of stranded residents. Already there are tales of trauma and survival from those who've made it out.
Water up to the rooftops. This flooded outback community as breathtaking from above as it is heartbreaking.
Individually, people have had some significant losses in terms of their houses, their personal effects. That's traumatic for anyone.
Kalkarindji swamped by its biggest flood in more than 20 years, along with 3 other remote communities. Homes and buildings left inundated, like the community's world-famous art centre.
The last few hours, the water came up extremely quickly, and that's where I thought we might get a little bit more out, but some things we had to give up on.
These two workers spent 5 hours bogged in the rising waters before a helicopter came to rescue them.
As you can see, we are floating, waiting to be rescued, just sitting in a river.
The hundreds forced to evacuate, flown in to an Air Force runway in Katherine, 300 kilometres south of Darwin.
We just had a rough day today.
The most vulnerable, the first to land on dry ground. Now safe, the realisation of everything left behind is sinking in.
When you look at your house underwater, it's really sad. You lose everything there.
The Australian Defence Force stepping in to assist with evacuations.
A C-130 and a C-127 will evacuate people from Kalkaringi to Katherine, then they'll be bussed through to Darwin.
This former COVID quarantine centre in Howard Springs to be home for the foreseeable future for evacuees as they begin to arrive in Darwin. For those still waiting to be evacuated, some comfort. The worst of the rain may now have passed. Matt Garrick, ABC News, Darwin.